I'm Crystal Haynes, and tonight on Greater Boston, a look at Charlie Baker's legacy as his last full day on the job comes to an end. Plus, COVID wastewater levels hit highs not seen since last winter, thanks in part to a new subvariant, as Boston Public Schools ask students and staff to mask up. Two doctors join me ahead. And finally, the NFL reels from Damar Hamlin's horrific injury and the collapse on the field during Monday Night Football. Will changes be made? It's the end of an era in Massachusetts and the end of Charlie Baker's last full day as governor. So by this time tomorrow, his successor, Maura Healey, will have officially taken over the corner office. So how will Baker, consistently ranked among the most popular governors in the country, be remembered here in Massachusetts? Well, to answer that question is GBH State House reporter Katie Lannan joining me now. I know that it's a very busy day at the State House, Katie.
Yes, it sure is. Good to be with you, though, Crystal.
Well, let's talk about, Governor Baker's record. 8 years in office. He has consistently been voted one of the most popular governors in the country. What's the feeling like right now as he leaves office?
Yeah, it's definitely a very emotional day. It's kind of a weird time at the State House because even today, as the governor's getting ready to take this emotional, symbolic last walk out, the new legislature has just been sworn in. So there's celebration. There's, the governor has called this bittersweet that he's leaving. He said he's really going to miss the people of Massachusetts and the work they've all done together. And like you said, he's been very popular with voters. He has good relationships with the legislature, even though it's controlled almost entirely by Democrats. So there is, I think, a real sense of an emotional goodbye here today.
And so we know that in his final address, he talked about his achievements. He's talking about the budget. I mean, certainly, the budget has gone from $1 billion deficit to a $5 billion surplus. The state's rainy day fund increased to $7 billion. He actually was able to give taxpayers back some money, which I think surprised a lot of lawmakers. But there were also some big challenges there. The COVID-19 pandemic and all of the things that came with. The MBTA is still a mess, if I can say that. And of course, the R&V scandals. So, I mean, what do you think that Maura Healey and Kim Driscoll are going to be inheriting as you have this sort of dichotomy of achievements and then challenges, right?
Right. So Healey today struck a really optimistic note, saying she sees the state's challenges as opportunities. And certainly there's, transportation is one of the things that I think is going to be at the forefront of her tenure early on, much like it was when Governor Baker came in 2015 and had to deal with the series of snowstorms that left the MBTA unable to function. Maura Healey is coming in at a time where the T is also in turmoil, and she's got a worldwide search already ongoing for the next general manager. So I think we're going to see some focus on the T early on, probably. She said housing is going to be one of her priorities, and that's definitely an issue that the Governor Baker has tried to address. He's gotten zoning reforms through to take a bite out of that somewhere down the line. Eventually, they don't pay off right away. So one of the things that is interesting, though, is those kind of big issues that face Massachusetts tend to be seen as more intractable. They haven't really taken Governor Baker into lower approval rating territory that these problems persist. He's still viewed as popular as he tries to tackle them, but as residents in Massachusetts still face those challenges in their daily life.
Do you think that as the transition happens, there'll still be that same bipartisan feel? I mean, Charlie Baker was certainly a moderate Republican, one that both sides of the aisle felt like they could work with.
It's interesting, right? We haven't seen what kind of governor yet Maura Healey is going to be. Of course, she's not governor yet, so that's why. But she did stake out that kind of moderate Charlie Baker-like lane while she campaigned. But she also built a reputation as a progressive attorney general over the last 8 years. And Democrats, when they hold a corner office, can have fraught relationships with the Democrats in the legislature as they try to see who really gets to be the one to set the state's agenda. So there have been tense relationships between the Democrats in the legislature and Democratic governors before, whereas, Massachusetts likes to have a Republican in the corner office to serve as kind of that check on the maybe more progressive leanings of the legislature. And Maura Healey could also provide that check if she chooses to stick to that Baker-style image.
And so, in the last 30 seconds now, what do you see as the day one looking like for the Healey administration as Baker, leaves, takes that final walk?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of ceremony, first and foremost, with her swearing in during the day and a celebration at the TD Garden at night. Maybe we'll see some more cabinet appointments come out from her as she continues building her team and setting up the infrastructure of her administration.
All right, Katie Lannan, thank you so much for your time. I know you've been running around, you've been covering this for a while, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
It's the same old winter story. The drop in temperature during the colder months brings a rise in COVID cases, and this year is no different. Wastewater levels in Massachusetts have hit highs not seen since last winter's surge of the Omicron variant. That's thanks to a trio of immune-resistant subvariants, and one of them, known as XBB, accounted for just 11% of all COVID cases across New England just about a month ago. Well, now it's behind more than 3/4 of them. The rise of XBB as kids return from a lengthy holiday break has prompted Boston Public School officials to ask students and staff to wear face masks for 8 days after their return from vacation. This is in an effort to reduce the spread of not just COVID, but the flu and other respiratory illnesses like RSV. But it's a request, not a mandate. So is BPS doing enough to keep people safe? And what about the rest of us? So here with me now is Dr. Shira Doron, infectious disease physician and hospital epidemiologist at Tufts Medical Center, and Dr. David Hamer, a professor of global health and medicine at Boston University and interim director of the school's Center for Emerging Infectious Diseases Research and Policy. Welcome to you both.
Great to be with you.
So I want to talk about where we are in terms of COVID cases right now, especially around the city of Boston. Dr. Doron, why don't you talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing a bit of a confusing picture, to be honest with you. We see this really quite dramatic increase in the wastewater virus levels over the last few days or so. And yet we aren't really seeing that in the case numbers, either at the state level or in Boston. Boston's seeing an 18% decrease over the last week in cases. Hospitalizations are up a little bit. But when you look at where we are today, January 4th, compared to a year ago, January 4th, it's like a different COVID planet. I mean, we're talking about around 900 cases on a 7-day average in the state versus 23,000 a year ago. So things are a lot better, even though we're seeing this dramatic change in the wastewater at the moment.
Dr. Hamer, what do you make of these numbers recently?
I'm concerned by the rise in the wastewater data. And part of the challenge is there's a lot more people using home rapid tests. And those data don't feed into the numbers that the state has. In addition, a lot of universities and some schools a year ago were testing often with PCR or with rapid tests, and those data would feed into the state level data. And so that information is not reaching the state. So the state numbers, I think, unfortunately, are not as accurate as they used to be. But that said, I agree with Dr. Doron. I mean, there may just be a lot of people with milder infections. Hospitalizations have not changed very much. So that's good news. That means there are fewer people with severe disease. But the suggestion is that there's a lot of COVID circulating, and that XBB, 1.5 or whatever the current strain is, seems to have really taken off in New England and Massachusetts in the last few weeks.
Well, we know that BPS is saying that, it's not just COVID that's their concern. They're thinking about the flu. They're thinking about RSV, other illnesses. I know that Superintendent Skipper had cited, something like 60% of the flu cases in Boston are among 17-year-old folks and younger. And she also points to Black and brown communities. As we talk about that, is this mask mandate then necessary?
Well, the good news is that RSV is in the rearview mirror. That infection peaked weeks ago. We're seeing almost no positive tests at my hospital over the last several weeks. Influenza, we are hearing about high levels. We do have to recognize that we've changed the way we count influenza cases in a way that's going to make levels look higher. And so we look at influenza hospitalizations. It appears we're past the peak on that too. I'm not taking a sigh of relief yet because we had 2 peaks last year, but we are in a manageable flu season from a hospitalization standpoint right now in Massachusetts.
So then what do you think about this mask mandate?
Well, I think that...
recommendation. It's not a mandate, it's a recommendation.
Right. I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense to focus mask recommendations on schools and children when we aren't having those conversations more broadly about adults and all of the other venues within our state that are wide open and normal. And they're wide open and normal because we are in a very different stage of the pandemic with lots of immunity, access to testing, and access to treatment.
Dr. Hamer, what do you think about the mask recommendation here?
I slightly defer in that I think that we're at a point. RSV is definitely dying down. Influenza has calmed down. COVID may be increasing, although it's not increasing in severity or impact on healthcare facilities. But there's still a lot of virus circulating, and influenza can affect young children, can make them quite ill. And in past years, if you shut down all the schools, which I don't recommend, but if you do that, then it often leads to an interruption in influenza transmission in a community. So there's sort of movement of influenza into schools and then from the schools back to home. But I agree with Dr. Doron. If you're going to be doing a mask recommendation, it should be probably more widely implemented. And some universities, including Boston University, where I work, is having a stronger recommendation for mask use for the whole month of January as students return from all over the country, having been at events with families and friends, because the increased risk of transmission. And, the benefits are, if you get sick from influenza, you can actually be quite sick and you can lose many days, 3 to 5 days or more from work or from school. And that can really, have a negative impact on your education. But also if you have a child and your child gets sick and can't go to school, then the parents are going to have to worry about taking care of that child, and it may interrupt their usual schedule. So, there's some benefits to mask use that go beyond just simply preventing disease.
Well, there are families and there are some folks who say that this recommendation didn't go far enough. 8 days is not long enough. I want to pull up a statement from the Families for COVID Safety press release, and they say that the failure to institute true required universal masking after the holiday break follows neither the data nor the science. And there's a quote here from one of the parents, Suleika Soto, who says, quote, "This is an inequitable policy decision that leaves our children and the entire BPS community less protected in the midst of the current surge." I know, Dr. Doron, you don't think we need to go overboard with the masking, but when we're talking about disparate outcomes for Black and brown communities, do we need to have a little bit more caution here?
Well, I really believe that masks work. And before the CDC recommended making masks at home because that's all there was access to, and therefore recommended that everyone do it together because yours will protect me and mine will protect you, which was a message that was born of the fact that cloth masks don't work as well as medical masks. Before that, we knew that medical masks were used as personal protective equipment. And today, when the supply chain allows for people to use medical masks, and I believe that schools should be distributing free medical masks to those who want to wear them, we don't need to worry so much about what other people are doing, because we each have the ability to protect ourselves with a well-fitting, high-quality medical grade mask. And I think that is a better strategy than relying on other people to reluctantly do so, who may then wear them incorrectly. They might not fit well, and they might not be good quality.
Well, Dr. Hamer, I know that the winter isn't over. Certainly it isn't in New England. You know, it doesn't always follow the calendar. What should folks do, to your mind, in the research that you've done, as we move forward through the winter months?
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual. And as Dr. Doron mentioned, you know, it really is an individual decision. But I think that anybody who is, you know, at high risk for developing severe disease, whether it be from influenza or from COVID-19, should be thinking about mask use to protect themselves, or if they have family members that are vulnerable, to protect those family members. And that goes beyond just schools and universities. It extends to the workplace, public transportation, and you know, especially during the winter months when there's, you know, usually a higher risk because people are forced to be indoors. So I think, you know, continued sort of personal protection for those who perceive a need, whether it's their personal need or to protect family members, is a wise idea.
All right. Well, Dr. Shira Doron and Dr. David Hamer, thank you so much for taking some time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
The Buffalo Bills did not talk to the press during their walkthrough at Gillette Stadium today ahead of Sunday's game against the Pats, but it is safe to assume there's one thing on everyone's minds today: the condition of Bills safety Damar Hamlin, who went into cardiac arrest on the field Monday night, and he is now fighting for his life in the ICU. There's also been a lot of focus in the past day or so about how the NFL handled Hamlin's collapse, taking an hour to officially postpone the game after medical staff administered CPR for about 10 minutes before getting him to the hospital. All of this while his teammates and, of course, the fans looked on in horror. The NFL later denied it originally planned to restart the game, but that's not how it looked to many viewers, including journalist Ernest Owens. He cited speculation that, quote, the NFL didn't even lead the charge in canceling the game. The shaken coaches, captain, and players from both teams apparently called it quits. That's from a piece that he wrote for the Daily Beast titled, "NFL proves yet again it doesn't give a damn about black players." Ernest is also the author of the upcoming book, The Case for Cancel Culture. He joins me now, as does Ben Volin, senior NFL writer at the Boston Globe. Welcome. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. This was an incredible thing to watch on television, Ben, as we saw players that were basically collapsed to the ground after they saw Damar Hamlin collapse. I mean, I can't remember a time in watching NFL, you know, in recent memory that this has happened.
Truly a gut-wrenching scene on Monday night in Cincinnati at the Bills-Bengals game. I think you immediately saw the seriousness of the injury by the reaction of the Bills and Bengals players when they saw Damar Hamlin faint to the ground and immediately fighting for his life. And kudos to the medical staffs for the Bills and the Bengals for being right on top of him. And I think saving Damar Hamlin from an awful tragedy in the NFL as well. Damar Hamlin's heart had stopped functioning, and they got it back to normal beating again on the field. And I think their quick action really saved his life. And this is, as you said, this is not something that happens really ever in the NFL. The only other incident I can think of is in 1970, 1971, a player had a cardiac incident on the field and later died. But, you know, the medical staffs, they do all this training every year to prepare for such situations and never have to use it. So, you know, the time finally came, unfortunately, and I think they really rose to the occasion. So kudos to the medical staffs for the Bills and Bengals for really being on the spot and saving Damar Hamlin's life.
Yeah, and I know that the response, Ernest, has gotten a lot of criticism, including from yourself. Talk to me about, in watching this unfold, the response from the NFL, the response on the field. What was going through your mind?
You know, I think that what's really important is the way that the NFL as the organization institution handled it, right? It took them, a little over an hour to finally decide to cut the game. And it wasn't their choice. The teams had to put their foot down and say enough. And that says something for a league that has already been riddled in controversy, from the issues with CTE to other concerns around racial inequity. It's really frustrating that even now they're still prioritizing profit over the people. And I think it became very clear to so many fans and also observers such as myself why, once again, the NFL continues to not prioritize the health and safety of its players.
So I know that there's been a lot of conversation about whether or not that 5-minute restart actually came from the NFL or not. I know that ESPN has doubled down and said that we got this. We were told that they had to reset in 5 minutes.
Yes.
But, you know, the NFL saying that didn't happen. As we were talking about Damar Hamlin in the ICU right now, I mean, what does that conversation need to be?
Well, so the NFL had another media call today on Wednesday, and Troy Vincent actually came out and once again adamantly denied that there was ever any conversation about restarting the game. And he said he was the main point guy. He was on the phone with the official and with both coaches. And he says there was never any talk about restarting the game. Now, I've developed a theory. I think I know what happened. The information came from the ESPN's rules analyst, John Perry, a former NFL official, worked Super Bowls. He's in direct contact during the games with the league's instant replay booth, the guys in New York City who are determining, you know, all the instant replay decisions. And I think that's where the information came from, kind of a lower rung on the ladder of the NFL, not from the higher-ups. That's where I think there was some confusion, that potentially that information came from the instant replay, the officiating people, not from the executives who are truly in charge. So I think maybe that could explain and could allow, like, there's wiggle room for all sides to be correct. Troy Vincent could be correct that they never asked for the 5 minutes, and the players, I think, are correct that if they hadn't stepped in, maybe the game would have continued. Because in most cases where there's a traumatic injury on the field, in all sports, not just football, the game usually continues. It's very rare for them to postpone a game. So I think there was more of a mix-up in communication than the NFL truly trying to just move along with the game.
Yeah, and Ernest, I know you have to leave in a few minutes, and so and I'm going to continue our conversation with Ben. But what did you make of all of this back and forth about who was making those decisions out there?
Personally, I think that the long delay from the NFL on that whole decision shows me that there was some incompetence there. I think that the fact that there was even any type of entertainment of continuing the game after seeing those players take a knee and pray, to see that crowd go instantly silent, and to see someone being rushed out with an ambulance after being CPR. Right? I think that the humanity has to be remembered here. And I think that the game should have been called immediately. I think that when you see a situation where CPR has to be administered and you have to see that traumatic expression on those players, it is really hard to deny the impact that would have had on the game, regardless of whether or not it was an emergency or not. So I really think it's important for people to remember that these players are humans, they are people, and that their safety matters, and that the fact that it took a year for them to do this, an hour to do it felt like a year, is unacceptable. So I think people need to remember that.
All right, Ernest, I can hear your phone buzzing, so we're going to let you go. But Ben, I wanted to ask you a few more questions here as we see that this is also a moment where football and other sports are looking at how to make the game even more safer. Yeah. I know that there's been a conversation about putting plates over the chest. My husband coaches high school lacrosse, and he's been talking to me about the changes in that game. And we really don't see these types of injuries outside of sports with projectiles, with balls and things like that. So where do you think that this is going to be a pivot point for the NFL to start thinking about what the pads look like, what other safety equipment look like?
So that's a great question. And to me, this incident is different from the concussion incident. And to me, the NFL deserves all the scrutiny in the world over how they handle the concussions and continue to moving forward. We see all the time, even now with their protocols, the concussions slip through the cracks and guys are able to play when they're clearly concussed. But to me, this incident, it really does feel like a rarity, a one-off situation. I've been doing research for other similar incidents, and they seem to happen in sports, like you said, lacrosse, hockey, baseball. This is not a football-specific thing. Unclear as of now if Damar Hamlin had a predisposition for any sort of heart condition. A lot of unknowns right now. Yes, the NFL will always look to improve equipment, and maybe there is some sort of chest protector that they can introduce. But if anything, to me, this just validates the NFL's medical protocols, not necessarily how safe the game is, but they had an AED on site and they had 30 medical professionals at the game and emergency physicians who were able to get to Damar Hamlin within seconds of him having his issues on the field. So to me, if anything, it just showed how well the NFL prepares for situations like this, because it hadn't happened in decades, and they handled it very well.
I want to talk about Damar Hamlin as a player, because it looked like he really touched so many lives on that team in Buffalo. The fundraising is, it was $2,500 that he was on the GoFundMe for his, I believe it was his mother's daycare, and now it's in the millions of dollars. What impact has he had in Buffalo?
Yeah, I think before this incident, Damar Hamlin was just one of the guys. He was a second-year player. He was a sixth-round pick, so certainly not, a blue-chip kind of player, not a superstar by any stretch, but universally beloved. His teammates all loved him. He came from, I think, a rougher part of the Pittsburgh area, and Mike Tomlin, the Steelers coach, said he's known Damar Hamlin since he was 12, and to see him make the right decisions to better his future and to work his way into the NFL and to avoid some of the pratfalls. Mike Tomlin just talked about how proud he was of Damar Hamlin and the person he's become. And the charity you mentioned, it originally began as a toy drive, a Christmas toy drive, and this was before he was famous. He was just a University of Pittsburgh college athlete, starting this. And so it seems like Damar Hamlin has always had a good spirit, and it's been really heartwarming to see the NFL community rally around him, donate millions of dollars to his foundation, and just do something for him while he's obviously going through these very tough times.
The Bills are going to play the Pats on Sunday. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of eyes on that game, even more so than there already was going to be.
It's going to be an unprecedented display, no question, emotion on both sides. As of now, the game is still on. The NFL, Troy Vincent did kind of leave open the possibility of who knows, that maybe the game doesn't ultimately get played. But for now, there are no discussions. It's moving ahead, full steam ahead. 1 o'clock on Sunday in Buffalo. Going to be a very emotional scene for Bills fans, for the team, for even the Patriots. I mean, for anyone who's involved in football, you had to be affected by watching that scene on Monday night. And it'll be tough for the Bills. I mean, this is a big game now for playoff seeding. They're playing really well. They have Super Bowl hopes. Is it going to be tough for them to regroup from all this? Are they going to be able to use this as a rallying point? Obviously, all eyes are on the Bills, and all of our hearts are with them as well. And you can't help but feel for the Bills. And this is going to be a very emotional game on Sunday.
All right. Ben Volen, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Crystal Haynes. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Do you think he'll be all right?